Hi guys, and in this video we are going to have one more adventure with Odysseus before he gets back home to Ithaca. This is the cattle of the sun god. Remember, Odysseus is speaking to King Alcinous and his court. He's telling us all of these events in a flashback, and the last of which was he and his men passing past the Sirens and between Scylla and Charybdis. So now as they pass that, they come to the island where Helios has his cattle. And Odysseus begs his men to bypass the island of Thrinacia, but the exhausted crew insist on landing there. In the small hours of the third watch, when stars that shone out in the first dusk of evening had gone down to their setting, a giant wind blew from heaven, and clouds driven by Zeus shrouded land and sea in a night of storm. So just as dawn with fingertips of rose touched the windy world, we dragged our ship to cover in a grotto, a sea cave, where nymphs had chairs of rock and sanded floors. So just in the wee hours of the morning, when the stars are starting to finally lighten up, Zeus sends in a storm, a whole night of storm. And just as they get to the dawn, as dawn with fingertips of rose, they drag their ship into a little sea cave on the island of Thrinacia to take cover. I mustered all the crew and said, "Old shipmates, our stores are in the ship's hold, food and drink. The cattle here are not for our provision, or we paid dearly for it. Fierce is the god who cherishes these heifers and these sheep, Helios, and no man avoids his eye." So he gathers everyone and he tells them, "We have plenty of food and drink on the ship. That's for you. Leave the cows alone. They're not for us. They belong to Helios." Okay, so a storm drives them into a sheltered cove on the island of Thrinacia, and Odysseus warns his men against disturbing Helios's cattle. To this my fighters nodded, yes. But now we had a month of onshore gales blowing day in, day out, south winds or south by east. As long as bread and good red wine remained to keep the men up and appease their craving, they would not touch the cattle. But in the end, when all the barley in the ship was gone, hunger drove them to scour the wild shore with angling hooks for fishes and sea fowl, whatever fell into their hands, and lean days wore their bellies thin. So the men agree to stay away from the cattle, and as long as there's plenty of, it says here, as long as there's plenty of bread and good red wine, they wouldn't touch them. But they start to run out. It's been a month of storms, he says there. And so when they start to run out of food, then they go to the shore and they've got their hooks and they're fishing and they're looking for seabirds, whatever they could get their hands on. But the days were lean and they were starting to run out of food. Okay, so the men agree and they're cool as long as they have food to eat. But as the storms continue, they're stuck on the island. And when the food starts to run out, they start to go hungry. We all know where this is going. Okay. The storms continued, so one day I withdrew into the interior to pray the gods in solitude for hope that one might show me some way of salvation. So this is Odysseus saying that one day he decided to head inland away from the shore and to pray to see if the gods could tell him some way of saving himself and his men. Slipping away, I struck across the island to a sheltered spot out of the driving gale. I washed my hands there and made supplication to the gods who own Olympus, all the gods. But they, for answer, only closed my eyes under slow drops of sleep. So he says he went there, he washed his hands, he made his prayers of supplication, his prayers asking for help to all the gods. But the only answer they had for him was to make him fall asleep. So he goes off alone to pray to the gods, but instead he takes a nap. Not very good timing, Odysseus. So now on the shore, Eurylochus made his insidious plea. Eurylochus, remember, is one of Odysseus's men. "Comrades," he said, "you've gone through everything. Listen to what I say. All deaths are hateful to us, mortal wretches, but famine is the most pitiful, the worst end that a man can come to." Right? He calls them comrades, friends. We've gone through a lot. Listen to me. All deaths are hateful to us. Nobody likes to die. We're mortals, okay? Nobody likes to die. But famine, starving to death, is the worst. That's the most pitiful way to die. He says, will you fight it? Come, we'll cut out the noblest of these cattle for sacrifice to the gods who own the sky. And once at home in the old country of Ithaca, if that day ever comes, we'll build a costly temple and adorn it with every beauty for the Lord of Noon. He says, let's fight starvation. Let's cut down the best of the cattle as a sacrifice to the gods who own the sky. And then we'll promise that once we get home back to Ithaca, if that day ever comes, we'll even build a huge temple and decorate it with every beauty for Helios. Okay, so we'll try to make it up to Helios. We'll sacrifice his best cattle here, and then we'll build him a temple when we get home. But if he flares up over his heifers lost, wishing our ship destroyed, and if the gods make cause with him, why then I say, better open your lungs to a big sea once for all than waste to skin and bones on a lonely island. He says, but if Helios gets mad, if he flares up over these lost cattle and wants to destroy our ship, and if the gods are on his side for that, then I say, I'd rather open up my lungs to the sea. I'd rather drown at sea once and for all than waste away to skin and bones by starving to death on this island. So while Odysseus is gone, Eurylochus makes an argument to the rest of the crew. I need you to answer this question, typed up to be turned in with embedded quotations. What is Eurylochus's insidious plea? Now be specific and include all parts of his argument. You can rewind the video and watch that bit again, okay? What exactly is the argument he makes? And if you were a member of the crew, would you be swayed by this argument? Or would you listen to Odysseus's original orders? All right. Thus Eurylochus, so that's what Eurylochus said, and they murmured, aye. That means yes, trooping away at once to round up heifers. Now that day tranquil cattle with broad brows were grazing near, and soon the men drew up around their chosen beasts in ceremony. They plucked the leaves that shone on a tall oak, having no barley meal, to strew the victims, performed the prayers and ritual, knifed the kine and flayed each carcass, cutting thigh bones free to wrap in double folds of fat. These offerings with strips of meat were laid upon the fire. Then, as they had no wine, they made libation with clear spring water, broiling the entrails first. And when the bones were burnt and tripes shared, they spitted the carved meat. So they kill the cattle. But they do it very ceremoniously, and they make all the offerings to the gods, and they burn all the right pieces and everything. So the men, they are convinced by Eurylochus's argument. They perform the sacrificial rites to honor the gods, and then they have a magical beef barbecue on the beach. Just then, so meanwhile Odysseus taking a nap, just then my slumber left me in a rush. My eyes opened, and I went down the seaward path. No sooner had I caught sight of our black hull than savory odors of burnt fat eddied around me. Grief took hold of me, and I cried aloud. So he wakes up, he starts heading back down toward the beach. Just as he catches sight of the ship down there, he smells the barbecue. He smells the delicious odor of cooking meat, and he cries aloud, "O Father Zeus and gods in bliss forever, you made me sleep away this day of mischief. O cruel drowsing in the evil hour, here they sat, and a great work they contrived." Oh no. All right, Lizzie, come here. Okay. Lampetia, in her long gown, meanwhile, had borne swift word to the overlord of Noon. They have killed your kind. Do you know who Lampetia is? She's the daughter of Helios, the sun god. So Lampetia is the daughter of the sun god Helios, and it's her job to watch the cattle. But you know what? Odysseus and his men killed the cattle. So can you pretend to be Lampetia? Can you go, "Dad, they killed your cows"?
Dad, they killed your cows.
And the Lord Helios burst into angry speech amid the immortals. "O Father Zeus and gods in bliss forever, punish Odysseus' men, so overweening, so proud and bold. Now they have killed my peaceful kind, my joy at morning when I climbed the stars, and evening when I bore westward from heaven. Restitution or penalty they shall pay, and pay in full, or I go down forever to light the dead men in the underworld," right? Zeus, you got to punish these guys. They really overstepped their boundaries. They've killed my cattle, my pride and joy. They need to pay for what they've done, or I will take the sun and I will go down and light the dead men in the underworld, right? I will take the sun out of this world and I will take it down to the underworld where the dead are. So Helios' daughter Lampetia tells her father that Odysseus' men have slaughtered his cattle, and Helios demands that Zeus and the other gods punish Odysseus and his men. Okay, and so that's exactly what Zeus does. When Odysseus and his men set sail again, they are punished with death. A thunderbolt from Zeus destroys their boat, and all the men drown. Only Odysseus survives. Exhausted and nearly drowned, he makes his way to Calypso's island, which is where we meet him originally. And Odysseus has now brought us up to date. So let's just look at this one more time. He fought here in Troy. On the way, they stopped and they battled the Cicones. Then they got blown off course and ended up with the Lotus Eaters, and then the Cyclops, and then the Bag of Winds, and then the giant cannibals, and then Circe and Land of the Dead, and back to Circe, and then down past the Sirens, and then you've got Charybdis and Scylla. Number 13 is Thrinacia, the cattle that we just read, okay? And then he ends up Calypso, and then from Calypso he goes to Phaeacia, which is where King Alcinous and his court. So this whole time, since Calypso, we've been listening to Odysseus here at number 15 telling us about all these other adventures. And what happens next is he goes home to Ithaca and kills everybody. Bye!